Have you ever felt like your strength was slipping right through your fingers, as if life's pressures were just too heavy to bear? Maybe you've been dealing with financial struggles, relationship breakdowns, or moments of deep personal doubt. But here's the remarkable reality. Even when our resilience seems depleted, there's a source of hope that never runs dry. Today I want to take you on a journey into 7 profound secrets revealed through the life and teachings of Jesus that can empower you to stand firm under any pressure. Along the way, I'll weave in stories of modern individuals who've faced overwhelming challenges but discovered that divine strength is available to everyone, no matter where you come from or what you've been through. Imagine for a moment being in a place where your fears are hushed, your anxieties are calmed, and your spirit is renewed day by day. That's the experience of those who learn to trust in something far greater than themselves. Many centuries ago, Jesus walked among people just like us. They wrestled with doubt, dealt with external pressures, and experienced heartbreak. Yet, he showed them a new way to endure adversity. One compelling instance is his time in the wilderness, where he fasted for 40 days. Weak, hungry, and vulnerable, he confronted temptation head-on. Instead of succumbing, he spoke words that cut through every lie. Man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. It was more than a simple rebuttal. It was a powerful testament that true sustenance and resilience come from a higher source. Throughout history, people have returned to that teaching to remind themselves that hope doesn't vanish when physical provisions are scarce. I once met a single mother named Elaine who raised 3 kids while holding down 2 jobs. She would often say her strength was soul deep, and whenever she prayed, she felt renewed. Watching her, I realized that trust in God isn't just a comforting idea. It's a real, steady anchor when storms rage. In the biblical narrative, the disciples learned this same truth during a literal storm on the Sea of Galilee. Waves crashed violently, wind roared, and their boat was on the verge of capsizing. Panicked, they woke Jesus, who had been sleeping peacefully despite the chaos. Calmly, he rebuked the storm, challenging them. "Why are you so afraid, you of little faith?" Fear didn't vanish because the storm disappeared. Rather, it was replaced by a profound recognition that they weren't alone. In the same way, Elaine's life was stormy, but she discovered the peace that trust brings. Trust in God transforms the frantic scramble for control into a quiet confidence that everything has a purpose. Even if we don't get immediate solutions, we can find stillness knowing we're not abandoned to fate. There's a classic story of Lazarus, a man who died and was buried before Jesus finally arrived. Though many wondered why he delayed, Jesus declared that Lazarus' sickness would not end in permanent death. Then, at the appointed time, Lazarus was raised, demonstrating that God's timing is always perfect, even when it feels delayed. And this isn't just ancient history. I've heard countless testimonies from people whose breakthroughs came at the wrong time by human standards, but turned out to be exactly right in God's grand design. Foundation of resilience, prayer is the sustaining practice that keeps our hearts aligned with that trust. Prayer isn't just a formality or a hollow ritual. It's a lifeline, a direct channel to the divine that fuels the soul. Picture yourself in a crowded, noisy room when suddenly someone speaks your name in a loving, familiar voice. You would tune everything else out just to focus on that one voice. Prayer works in much the same way. When you pray, you tune out the cacophony of worry, fear, and doubt, and your spirit centers on the calm, reassuring presence of God. Jesus modeled this in the Garden of Gethsemane just hours before his crucifixion. His soul was overwhelmed, and he was so distressed that his sweat was like drops of blood. In that darkest hour, he prayed not once but 3 times. "Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." Each time, Jesus rose with renewed determination to finish his mission. Contrast his vigilance with the disciples who fell asleep instead of praying. When the soldiers arrived to arrest Jesus, fear seized them and they fled, unprepared for what lay ahead. Through this vivid scene, we learn that prayer fortifies us, shaping our responses to trials before they strike. I recall an old friend, Patrick, who was often plagued by anxiety attacks. He decided to make a habit of praying daily, long before any panic could set in. Over time, he noticed a dramatic change. The attacks diminished in severity, and he found himself confronting challenges with greater poise. Prayer didn't erase his problems, but it equipped him with the fortitude to stand his ground. Scripture tells us to pray without ceasing, meaning a life in perpetual conversation with God. That might be while driving to work, washing dishes, or taking a walk. Even brief, silent prayers, like an internal whisper of gratitude or a plea for guidance, can radically shift your emotional state. You see, prayer is an invitation to partnership. It reminds us that we don't have to face life's battles alone. When we open our hearts to God, we're acknowledging that we need something beyond our finite strength. Think of it like stepping into an uncharted forest path but having a well-informed guide right beside you. In those moments, you no longer fear getting lost. You may still tread carefully, but you have a knowledgeable companion. Through daily prayer, we practice leaning on a divine guide who already knows the way out of our darkest valleys. Resilience that runs contrary to what society often preaches, serving others. In our world, strength is frequently associated with independence and self-reliance. Yet Jesus flipped that script in a moment forever etched into history, the washing of his disciples' feet. It was at the Last Supper when, rather than expecting service from his followers, he knelt before them like a humble servant. Even Peter at first resisted the idea that the Messiah would stoop to such a lowly task. But Jesus firmly taught, "Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet." Humility is a powerful display of inner confidence. By lowering himself, Jesus wasn't undermining his authority. Instead, he demonstrated that genuine leadership and real strength come wrapped in compassion and humility. Serving the needs of another person might feel inconvenient, but it often births unexpected blessings. The world is hungry for kindness, and when we offer it, we tap into a wellspring of renewal in our own souls. I've known people who volunteer at homeless shelters or mentor at-risk youth, and they often say they receive far more than they give. Their own struggles become more bearable, their perspective widens, and they find a deeper sense of purpose. This mirrors what Jesus said about himself. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. When you serve, whether it's preparing a meal for a neighbor in crisis or spending a weekend building homes for those in need, you step into a spiritual dynamic that lifts you above your personal worries. Serving others becomes an antidote to despair because it directs our gaze outward. No longer fixated solely on our struggles, we grow aware of a bigger story unfolding around us. When I was younger, I participated in a mission trip to a remote village. Initially, I went with the mindset of wanting to bless others, but I left feeling like I was the one who had been blessed. Seeing the joy of children running barefoot yet laughing wholeheartedly made me rethink what I considered necessary for happiness. It's in those moments, giving your energy, time, and resources to help the less fortunate, that you discover a rare kind of fulfillment. The act of serving transforms your heart, bolsters your resilience, and connects you with a divine love that's far greater than yourself. Of this entire conversation, faith is that unwavering conviction that there's more to reality than what your eyes can see or your mind can fully comprehend. Over and over, Jesus emphasized faith as the key to unlocking extraordinary possibilities. In one of the Gospels, he said, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move." Now, maybe we haven't seen mountains literally leap across valleys, but we have seen what happens when a person's faith is activated. They begin to think differently, speak differently, and respond to adversity in ways that defy normal constraints. Consider the woman who had been bleeding for 12 years. Her story is one of sheer determination, fused with faith. She tried countless treatments and spent everything she had, yet her condition only grew worse. In her desperation, she believed that if she could just touch the hem of Jesus' garment, she would be healed. This was an act of radical faith, and the moment she touched his clothing, her body was restored. Jesus felt power go out from him and turned to say, "Daughter, your faith has healed you." This exchange underscores the potency of genuine belief. Faith doesn't always produce instant miracles, though. Sometimes it's the sustaining force that carries you through a prolonged battle. When doctors tell you the prognosis is bleak, or when your financial situation seems impossible, faith whispers that there's still hope in a divine plan, even if the circumstances are grim. Faith reminds us that we're never truly alone, and that our struggles might be shaping us for a purpose we can't yet foresee. I have a dear friend named Veronica who battled a life-threatening illness. For months, the medical reports were disheartening, and people around her began to lose hope. But every morning, Veronica would proclaim, "I know God is in control. I trust him." And while the path was excruciating, full of treatments, sleepless nights, and moments of raw fear, her unwavering faith kept her spirit alive. Eventually, she recovered, but the real miracle was how she glowed with inner peace, even at her weakest. Watching her made me realize that faith isn't a guarantee you'll bypass the fire. It's the assurance that you won't walk through it alone or without purpose. Transformative acts we can practice is forgiveness. Often people equate forgiveness with weakness. They imagine it as letting an offender off the hook, but in the teachings of Jesus, forgiveness is the ultimate demonstration of strength and grace. While being crucified, he famously prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Think about the depth of compassion in that moment. Tortured, betrayed, and humiliated, he chose mercy. Forgiveness is not about pretending an offense never happened or dismissing the hurt. Instead, it's deciding to release the burden of resentment to God, trusting that true justice and healing ultimately come from him. When you hold on to bitterness, it's like tying yourself to the pain your offender caused. You become bound to that moment in time, unable to move forward fully. Forgiveness severs that binding rope, allowing you to step into emotional freedom. I've heard people share incredible testimonies, like someone who forgave the drunk driver responsible for a family member's death, or a friend of mine who forgave an unfaithful spouse and saw their marriage restored. These stories aren't easy. They defy human logic and raw emotion. Yet, time and again, those who genuinely forgive testify to a supernatural release, a lifting of a heavy weight they'd carried for far too long. Still, forgiveness is often a process, not a single event. You might forgive someone today and feel the sting again tomorrow. That's when you choose forgiveness anew. Jesus taught that we are to forgive repeatedly, 70 times 7, implying an ongoing state of grace. The freedom that comes with such forgiveness is profound, infusing us with a newfound strength and inner peace that no act of revenge could ever deliver. It might sound passive at first glance, like giving up or resigning yourself to fate, but Jesus showed us that real surrender is an act of profound courage and trust. When he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, staring down the horror of the crucifixion that awaited him, he prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." He didn't hide his anguish, he was transparent about his dread, but he ultimately entrusted himself to the Father's plan. You might find yourself in situations that don't make sense. Maybe a job you thought was secure collapses, or a relationship you counted on crumbles without warning. Surrendering to God's will doesn't mean we ignore our emotions or deny our pain. Instead, it's an invitation to place our stories in the hands of someone far wiser than we are. Proverbs 16:9 says, "In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." It's a reminder that we often see only a small portion of the puzzle. I remember feeling devastated after losing a dream job due to corporate restructuring. At the time, I was upset and couldn't see any silver lining, but in that forced transition, a far better position opened up for me, one that aligned more closely with my passions. It was a real-life illustration of how what seems like a dead end can be a divine redirection. Surrender taught me that God's ways might be mysterious, but they're ultimately rooted in a design that exceeds my limited understanding. In the end, surrender can lead to genuine rest because you're no longer fighting to control every piece of your life. Think of it like relaxing your grip on a steering wheel when you realize there's an autopilot better equipped to navigate. That doesn't mean you stop making choices or showing up for your responsibilities. It means you stop shouldering the entire universe on your own. And in that release, you discover a deeper strength, the kind that only emerges when we align ourselves with a purpose much greater than any single ambition. Overlooked key to resilience. It's so easy to focus on what we lack, whether that's material resources, health, or emotional support. But Jesus consistently demonstrated the power of thankfulness. When faced with feeding a multitude using just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, he began by looking up to heaven and giving thanks. Miraculously, the food multiplied, and thousands were fed with leftovers to spare. This wasn't merely about supernatural multiplication. It was about shifting from a scarcity mindset to an abundance perspective. Gratitude signals to your heart that there is still plenty in life worth celebrating. It reminds you that even in the darkest valleys, glimmers of hope remain. I once kept a gratitude journal during a particularly tough year. At first, I struggled to find even the simplest blessings: a warm cup of coffee in the morning, a friend's encouraging text. But as the days turned into weeks, my eyes began to open to a wealth of small gifts everywhere. That daily act rewired my outlook, stirring joy where there had been none. Jesus also thanked God at Lazarus's tomb, even before the miracle of resurrection happened. There's a potent lesson there. Being grateful doesn't have to wait until everything's resolved. In fact, it's in the waiting and in the uncertainty that gratitude becomes a true stabilizer. It says, "I believe in goodness and provision, even when I don't see it yet." Such gratitude, paradoxically, can usher in a miracle faster than you might expect. Gratitude also dispels envy and comparison. When you pause to appreciate what you have, you're less likely to brood over what others possess or what you think you deserve. This freedom from comparison fosters a resilient joy that can weather life's storms. So, whether you're facing a crisis or experiencing a season of blessing, cultivate an active attitude of thankfulness. Let it rise from your lips and radiate from your heart. In doing so, you'll discover that you're stronger and more hopeful than you ever realized. Something we often overlook: the inner dialogue that shapes how we apply these truths. You might know all these powerful teachings: faith, prayer, forgiveness, humility. But if you're constantly telling yourself you're not worthy of God's help, or that your problems are too big, you may never experience the transformation that's possible. What if you replaced self-condemning thoughts with faith declarations like, "I believe God has a plan for my life," or "I trust that no circumstance is greater than His power"? One remarkable aspect of the Gospels is how Jesus consistently uplifted people. He saw beyond their limitations and failures, speaking to their destiny rather than their present weakness. When Peter faltered in his faith, Jesus still called him the rock upon which he would build his church. That's vision. That's looking beyond the moment. We can learn from that approach, not just toward others, but toward ourselves. Imagine speaking truth and grace over your own life day in and day out. I remember someone once describing the voice of the Holy Spirit as the voice that calls you higher, never pushing you down. That doesn't mean it won't convict you or challenge you to change, but it does mean that it lifts you up with hope, reminding you that your story can be redeemed. If you continually dwell on thoughts like, "I'm too broken," "It's too late for me," or "I'll never change," you might miss out on the miracle that's waiting for you. By aligning your internal narrative with God's promises, you open a door for real breakthrough. This shift in self-talk is an ongoing discipline. In moments of failure, you may want to spiral into guilt or despair, but that's precisely when choosing to recall who you are, loved, forgiven, and empowered by a divine source, makes all the difference. The mind is a battlefield, and the truths we've discussed are your spiritual armor. Wield them boldly. Over time, you'll see that your capacity to endure hardships grows stronger because your inner environment is fortified with unshakable truth. Each of these principles, trusting God, prayer, serving others, faith, forgiveness, surrender, and gratitude, functions best when lived out in community. When Jesus walked the earth, he didn't just preach to crowds. He invested deeply in a small group of disciples, sharing meals, traveling together, and teaching them intimately. In turn, they supported one another, prayed together, and learned to love each other despite differing personalities and backgrounds. In a modern context, that might mean plugging into a church, a home group, or a supportive circle of friends who uplift and challenge you. Perhaps you're that anchor for someone else who feels isolated. Relationship is where much of our transformation is tested and refined. If you never interact with others, it's easy to maintain the illusion of a perfect spiritual life. But once you engage deeply, friction arises, misunderstandings occur, and you're forced to practice forgiveness, patience, and humility in real time. I've personally grown the most in seasons where I opened up about my struggles to trusted friends and mentors. They offered prayer, practical help, and wise counsel. My burdens became lighter simply because they were shared. I also learned that community is a two-way street. While I received encouragement, I was also challenged to give it, to serve, to show grace, and to be present for others in their darkest hours. That's how we incarnate the kind of love Jesus modeled, by creating spaces where people can encounter acceptance, guidance, and a tangible taste of God's compassion. In these relationships, our personal transformation becomes a collective testimony. When someone sees your faith lived out through genuine hardship, it resonates more powerfully than any polished sermon could. It says, "This is real. This works when life gets hard." And that testimony can spark faith in others who thought resilience was impossible. Like ripples in a pond, the effect grows, and before you know it, a whole community is strengthened, bound together by a love that transcends differences. Drawing these threads together, we've explored the power of trust in God, prayer, service, faith, forgiveness, surrender, gratitude, the importance of positive inner dialogue, and living in community. Each principle stands on its own, but together they form a tapestry of resilience that can sustain you through life's fiercest storms. Maybe you're watching this video feeling weighed down by heartbreak or uncertainty. Maybe you're battling an illness, coping with job loss, or struggling in your relationships. Wherever you are, these timeless truths are extended to you as an invitation. Imagine waking up each day with a sense of hope, no matter the circumstances, because you know there's a larger purpose at work. Prayer anchors you, reminding you that you don't have to carry your troubles alone. Serving others lifts your eyes beyond your own challenges, revealing how small acts of kindness spark transformation on both ends. Faith propels you to see beyond the immediate storm to a horizon where miracles can occur. Forgiveness breaks the chains of bitterness, opening your heart to new beginnings. Surrender allows you to breathe, assured that even when things don't go your way, you're still held by a loving hand. Gratitude refreshes your spirit, shifting your focus from scarcity to abundance. Positive inner dialogue keeps you aligned with the truth of who you really are in God's eyes. And living all of this out in community means you never have to face the battle alone. So here's my challenge to you. Don't just listen, take action. Choose one of these principles and actively apply it today. Pray in the morning, asking God for guidance. Call a friend or family member you've been avoiding and offer forgiveness. Volunteer at a local shelter or simply listen to someone who needs a compassionate ear. Let your faith stretch just a bit further than it did yesterday. And when you feel fear creeping in, remind yourself that Jesus still speaks to storms. In a moment, I'll lead you in a brief prayer, one that sums up all we've discussed and offers a space to surrender your struggles, fears, and hopes. If you're ready for a renewed spirit and a fresh sense of resilience, join me now. Heavenly Father, I come before you with a heart that might be weary or uncertain. Yet I believe you are the ultimate source of strength. Teach me to trust you fully, to pray with a genuine heart, and to see the needs of others as opportunities to show kindness. Strengthen my faith so it overcomes every fear and doubt. Help me forgive those who've hurt me, just as you've forgiven me. I surrender my plans to your perfect will, trusting your timing and purpose. Fill me with gratitude for all I've been given, great or small. Guide my thoughts, Lord, so they align with your truth rather than my insecurities. Surround me with a community of people who will encourage me and help me encourage them in turn. I accept your love and ask for renewed resilience. In Jesus' name, Amen. Thank you for watching and for joining me in this journey. If this message has touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe and share it with someone who might need a little hope today. You never know how a simple act of sharing could be the spark that lights up another person's path.